This didn't come from, I want to do a show that gets good ratings. This came from, I want to do a show that tells this story.
I have absolutely no strategy for what projects I work on other than what is interesting. It's more important that you go off and learn what to make movies about than how to make movies. It's not the spectacle that interests me, it's the bigger purpose, it's the bigger story.
The master I need to serve is the story. Because I do feel that I sort of dabble in everything and have mastered nothing. That your voice is as important as anyone else's. Make your movie. You can actually make your movie. That there are people who talk about what they would do if, but they're not actually doing the thing. You're already like in, the top 10% because you actually have written it.
What made you set the film in 1979?
For decades, JJ Abrams has been incredibly successful in Hollywood. With a long list of accomplishments, he occupies an impressive place in the world of film and television production, an inspiring individual with impeccable work ethic. From blockbuster hits like Star Wars, Star Trek, Cloverfield, Mission Impossible, and many more. This creative genius has used his skills to craft stories that leave audiences mesmerized.
Are you lost?
No. We are. But we have a plan.
I spend most of my time in my room writing screenplays, really bad screenplays, but I was in my room doing that.
Although he has had immense influence in today's pop culture, he also struggled with creative blocks, bad movies, and limited resources.
Here we go. Great energy and action. You have to plan things the best you can. And you always need to be able to respond to the unexpected. And the unexpected can come in all sorts of forms. And I do think that there's nothing more important than knowing where you're going. I mean, I've had all sorts of situations where you plan things in a certain way and you suddenly find yourself doing something that's 180 degrees different. And then sometimes it works really well. And you feel like, wow, that really came together. And other times you think, oh my God, I can't believe this is where we are. And sometimes when it's not working out, it's because it's what you planned. And other times when it's not working out, it's because it didn't. It's like you never really know. But having a plan, I have learned in some cases the hard way, is the most critical thing, because otherwise you don't know what you're setting up. You don't know what to emphasize, because if you don't know the inevitable of the story, you're just as good as your last sequence or effect or joke or whatever, but you want to be leading to something inevitable. If we don't keep doing stuff and making things, then the anticipation will even be greater for whatever that next thing is. And I sort of feel like the best way to sort of exercise is to do it constantly. And so I feel like when there's a creative impulse, to not think about and get sort of paralyzed by any sense of what's expected or what people think might happen. Of course, I'm always nervous that something won't work or people won't like it or won't do well or whatever. But the truth is that this didn't come from, I want to do a show that gets good ratings. This came from, I want to do a show that tells the story.
I have absolutely no strategy for what projects I work on other than what is interesting to me. So while I'm able to work on projects that I would like to work on, there are certainly some things that I've come up with. When I had the couple years off in between the Star Wars films that I directed, I wrote a couple projects and they were both pilots for series. And I didn't strategically say I'm now going to write 2 pilots. I just found myself writing these things that happened to be not features at all. But there are a couple ideas that we're batting around that would be fun to do, and none have spaceships in them, which is a thrill. So don't consider what I do sort of from the outside in. And I don't really ever feel like I can identify a style. I mean, there are things I guess I do. The obvious sort of joke is that I overuse lens flares, and that's sort of what I'm known for. But I would say that in my approach, the thing that is most important to me is that I love larger than life kind of spectacle moments, but that what's important to me is that the characters are at the center, that emotionally you know where you are, and you're tracking characters that are taking you through those spectacular moments. And that to me is the most important thing, that balance of the intimacy with the spectacle and the sort of hyper reality. I think one of the best pieces of advice was from my dad when I was thinking about going to film school. Said it's more important that you go off and learn what to make movies about than how to make movies. So I ended up going to, leaving my home state and going to a different college, and it really did inform certainly my storytelling, my awareness of different sort of social circles and things I never would have experienced had I stayed in Los Angeles. It's not the spectacle that interests me. It's the bigger purpose. It's the bigger story. And so if the next story that I end up directing happens to have spectacle, it won't be because it has spectacle. It will be because it's part of what the story requires. I would love to do something that is, a much more intimate, film, or something where the visual effects, because I do love visual effects, but that's not the driving force of any of this. When you look at something like, The Irishman or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, those are stories where, yes, you could spend time if you want to talking about the de-aging process or about, recreating late 60s Westwood or something, but the fact is those are stories that the visual effects are beside the point. The movies I've been involved with, they're very much, that location can't possibly exist. That set has to be an extension of some sort digitally. That stuff to me is it's just because of these stories. I'd love to tell a story where the visual effects, maybe there are still 1,000 visual effects shots, but no one is really thinking about that, And I continue to feel that it is my responsibility to help tell stories that represent people, and often people who aren't necessarily finding themselves on screen. I can't imagine as a male, as a white male, what it would be like growing up not seeing myself represented in any way in a community, certainly in many cases as the main character. I don't actively, strategically go into a story saying, I'm gonna insert this here, I'm gonna insert that there. We didn't write the parts of Finn or Poe or Ray with any color in mind. But when it came time to casting, it felt like it was the right thing to do, to find a cast that looked more the way the world looks than not. And in the case of the LGBTQ community, it was important to me that people who go to see this movie feel that they're being represented in the film. I realized I was following two directors who were incredibly stylized, Brian De Palma and John Woo. And those are two directors that, each of them have a very specific and distinct style. And I knew that I had none. And I started thinking, well, do I create a style? Do I invent some, that's stupid, I couldn't do that. You know what I mean? I couldn't think of something that, like White Doves, John Woo, he had that. I didn't know what to do. So I thought, well, instead of trying to create something and impose it upon the movie, the master I need to serve is the story. I just need to do what the story requires and just focus on that and stop looking at it from the outside in, because that to me was the where I was getting stuck. There are people who are, insanely successful who do one thing really well, and sometimes I wish I did that. Because I do feel that I sort of dabble in everything and have mastered nothing, but the dabbling is part of the fun for me. The thing that I think it's not as much advice that I was given per se, but what I kind of learned early on is that that your voice is as important as anyone else's. Now, you may not always be right, and you shouldn't be cocky about it. I felt like I needed to learn that the ideas that I had were as good as anyone else's ideas. Certainly not better, and I love the collaboration, so it wasn't like it was a battle, but it's one of those things I think that it's good to be reminded, or if you don't know it at all, be told that thing that you feel, if you really feel it, other people do too, and that's something that is to be mined and to be celebrated. So when people say to me, well, what advice do you give? What do you think I should do if I want to make movies? And the amazing answer that was certainly not available to me when I was a kid is make your movie. You can actually make your movie. You can find a friend who's got a Canon 5D Mark II. You look around, you can find people to use as actors, and you just can make your film, and people are doing that, and that's the most amazing thing. Because the resources have been so limited for so long, there were a lot of people who would say, God, if I only had access to a camera, I would make a movie. There's a lot of talk about it. I remember when I was in college, I would spend most of my time in my room writing screenplays, really bad screenplays. But I was in my room doing that when I probably should have been studying or something. There were a lot of people I remember at parties who would talk about writing and that they wanted to be a writer. But I would always notice that they were out. Every time I would happen to go out, they would always be out. And I just know that there are people who talk about what they would do if, but they're not actually doing the thing. It's a lot easier to actually write a screenplay than you think it is. It might not be good, but most people talk about writing screenplays but don't actually write them. The people who write them you're already like in the top 10% because you actually have written it. And I was working on Star Trek as a producer, and I was never a fan of Star Trek to begin with. But when I finally read the script that we've been developing, I thought, oh my God, this movie's got great characters, amazing action, it's incredibly emotional, it's got the great optimism I was referring to. It's got, spectacle and intimacy and all the things I love, and I thought, well, this is nuts. If I don't do this movie, I'm going to regret it.